I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, how do you go from the really, I think, relatively free, creative outputs of music, of theatre, of speeches, of poetry, all of these types of things, of art, to something that feels a lot more constrained, right? You've got publishers and editors telling you, just say one thing, just say one idea, just give me one case study. How do you go from one to the other?
Well, the first thing I learned, writing a book, because I'd written graphic novels before, I'd written scripts before, is how unbelievably bloody hard it is. And it gave me a whole new respect for writers and for people who are prolific writers. It gave me a whole new respect and definition for what hard work is. Right? If you've ever, if there's any, PhD students in the house in particular, or people who are authors, you'll know draft number 7, you just want to pull your hair out and you're like, I thought I was done. My editors noticed a mistake on page 42, or there's that part wasn't explained properly. Brother Adam here actually is being quite humble, because I didn't have a formal research assistant or someone that I worked with in that sort of capacity. But actually, the one person that did help me massively was Brother Adam here. So please, a round of applause for Brother Adam. And he put together so I just gave him the kind of chapter titles and said, look, these are the things I want to talk about. And he put together a really, really amazingly succinct and useful kind of research folder. So a lot of the studies I referenced in there, Brother Adam had sent to me. But yeah, it is much more constrained. It really made me think much more about what hard work is. But really the main thing that I learned from the process of writing a book was the power of drafting. With songs, there's sort of this creative freedom where if you like a song, you'll just release it. And it's interesting because when you look at the greatest songwriters, so my friend was mentored by Rod Temperton, who used to write, who wrote Thriller and Billie Jean and all that sort of stuff. And he said one of the things that Rod did that no other songwriter he'd ever seen does is Rod will have 8 drafts of a song. So there's 10 versions of Thriller. And the version you've heard is version number 10. And I mean, there's 10 different bridges, 10 different hooks, 10 different guitar solos, and you've only heard one version. And what I realized with this book is that I feel like some of those skills that I've learned in these last few years, I've been taken off to write this, and I've got a young adult fiction that's coming out next year that I've almost finished, are skills that hopefully I can take back to music without overdoing it and saying, well, actually, no, I'm not going to let that out. Because my barrier of what I used to define as hard work has been permanently altered by this, man. It was tough.
Yeah. And I mean, trying to edit a book like this, right?
Yeah.
Trying to take something which always feel like, especially someone like me who works in academia, where it's like you've got to have one idea and it's got to be coherent, it's got to be this, you've got to do that. It's so formulaic, right? It feels so, it doesn't feel creative. It doesn't feel free in the way that I feel a lot of other artistic expression is free.
Yeah.
That I feel like being able to try to straddle all of those things, something academic, something autobiographical, but also something which is creative and beautiful to read, is a really difficult thing to balance, right?
Yeah, but also I think that's where the other things that I had done, the theatre, the creativity, the script writing, the music, I felt that's where all of that came in useful. That sort of previous history of being a storyteller. Now, you'll know because you read the first draft, right? But the first draft of this, can I swear today? Is that allowed? The first draft of this was basically just like an intellectual wank, right? Honestly, it was like 50,000 words too long. And the whole first chapter was all of the academic stuff and then some, with like a citation like every third paragraph. Because it was me kind of chip on my shoulder, I haven't been to uni, let me show everybody how clever I am kind of thing. And between both, Brother Adam and my editor from the publishing company, they were just like, you've written a PhD. That's something different to what you're trying to write. And so what we decided was, on a new format where the anecdotes would come at the beginning, and then the relevant scholarship would come at the end of the chapter. Because what I wanted was a story that was enjoyable to read and a story that was personal and that people could relate to my personal journey and then see their individual journeys in that story, but also realize that you're not going crazy. These were not random experiences. They didn't pop out of a vacuum. I wasn't put in a special needs class for kids that don't speak English when I was 7 because of one bad teacher. It came out of a broader historical landscape and a broader set of historical forces, and I wanted to offer solid scholarship to support my case that these were not random experiences, that these were part of a wider pattern, because that's how you make sense of the world. Part of how I came to even writing this book was trying to make sense of the world. Part of why I even began talking about race in the first place was not because I woke up at 5 and said, hey, you know what I want to do when I'm older? I want to discuss racism. It was because when I was 7, I wanted to be an astronaut. And there were people in the world that thought that wasn't an appropriate aim for somebody like me. And I didn't understand at 7 why that was. And so I wanted to figure out, why did people in the world think that someone like me should not aim to be an astronaut? Why were they offended by that idea? And so I feel like, I think between the craft that I took from the stage and from music, and the scholarship that, I've been lucky enough to sort of go on a particular journey of my own and have that freedom. I think one of the reasons it does work that way is that I didn't go to uni and I didn't go that traditional path. That's not to say loads of people like yourself that couldn't write a book like that. I think they could, but I think for my particular journey, not being institutionalized in that way and not having a particular curriculum I had to specialize in meant that if I felt like reading Marimba Ani one week, Toni Morrison another week, and Plato another week, I just could. I had the freedom to do that. I wasn't doing a degree in social anthropology. I wasn't doing a degree in Caribbean studies. And so I kind of got to pick and choose, and anytime something piqued my interest, I would just go off in an ancient Egypt hole for 3 years. As anyone who knows me knows I did. In my early 20s, I was just Kemet. That's all I did for like 3 years. I just read about ancient Egypt. And then I might decide, ancient India was interesting. Let me do 6 months there, and let me do a month in Song China, and so I was able to acquire kind of a broad landscape of knowledge precisely because I did have academic freedom, because I wasn't a full-time academic in a way, I think.
Yeah, I guess in some ways that kind of makes you almost quite a classical intellectual in some ways, where before these disciplinary boundaries got us pigeonholed in certain places, people just would read science and read philosophy and read literature, and you could do all of those things, right?
And I think there's lots of insights to be had that are interdisciplinary. I was reading, when I was researching the young adult fiction I'm working on now, I was reading Philip Pullman. He's got a book. So Philip Pullman wrote The Subtle Knife, that series. There you go. Yes, there you go. Right, and I've read all 3 of the books, and the trilogy, and the name of the trilogy is just escaping me right now, right? But one of the things he wrote in Demon Days was about how many of his ideas for books, even though then his books are not sci-fi, the concepts within his books come from reading science. And so that book that he's written, that's sort of alternative universe, people go through a sort of hole in the universe to somewhere else, that came from reading science. And so I feel like as a creative, and as an academic, there is a massive benefit from reading across genre and across discipline.